The winter weather pattern that we are dealing with is taking a crazy turn as we are expecting two different winter storms just over the next 4 days, and these are going to bring a bunch of snow, ice accumulation, and also the return of severe weather, including the threat for damaging winds, hail, and even tornadoes. After all this is done, we are likely going to see another winter storm during the middle of next week. Exactly what happens with that is a little uncertain right now, but it could even be further south than the winter storms we're dealing with this week. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down exactly what you need to know about the weather that'll be impacting the United States over the next 7 days, and we'll begin with what's happening across the country right now. And there's a lot of stuff to talk about. We got a big winter storm that is currently forming in the Central Plains and the Midwest, where moderate to heavy snowfall is falling in many areas this morning, and we're only expecting this to continue to ramp up as we go late into the morning and eventually into the afternoon hours. A lot of snow and ice is already out there right now, so take it slow on the roadways if you are traveling. This is all going to move into the Midwest and as well as the northern Ohio Valley later today, and then eventually by tomorrow, some snow and freezing rain will move even up into the northeast United States. While all this is happening, we got a elongated area of moisture that is coming from the Pacific Ocean, and this is going to fuel a threat for flooding in addition to severe weather today. Back over in the southeast, we do think that there could be a few tornadoes out there, even maybe an isolated strong tornado back along the Gulf Coast of the United States. By the way, there is a chance that we go live today for severe weather and winter storm coverage, so make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and click the bell icon down below so you're notified if and when we do go live. But elsewhere, we are talking mostly about rain across areas like the Mid-Atlantic and also back through the Tennessee Valley for the remainder of today. This winter storm is already intensifying this morning. We have a ton of snow and as well as freezing rain falling out there right now across the Central Plains, the Western Midwest, and also back into parts of the Southern Plains, where we even have a little bit of sleet and freezing rain diving into parts of southwestern Oklahoma and also through areas like the Tulsa area of Oklahoma and even near Joplin, Missouri right now. A little bit of freezing rain out there, so if you are traveling, take it slow on the roadways. The other winter storm that's been impacting the Midwest for the most part has moved out, but there is still a little bit of snow and a little bit of light freezing rain and sleet still out there, so keep that in mind if you have any travel plans today. Many schools still closed over there. As we go later into this morning, this snow is only going to intensify. We are expecting some moderate to heavy snowfall across parts of Illinois, Missouri, Iowa, and also back into southern Wisconsin, and then eventually lighter snow is going to be impacting areas like Nebraska, Kansas, and central and western Iowa. So the majority of the heavy snowfall is only going to be happening for about 2 to 3 hours, which means that in general, we will be talking about 1 to 2 inches of snow falling per hour, and then it'll eventually be much less once we get some of that lighter activity moving into some of these areas. A little bit of sleet and freezing rain still falling across parts of Missouri, even by around 10 to 11 o'clock this morning. Eventually, as we go into the early afternoon, snow is going to be blanketing many areas in the Midwest and the Northeast, especially back over in the Great Lakes, northeastern Illinois, northwest Indiana will likely be our heaviest pocket of snow right around 3 o'clock this afternoon. A little bit of freezing rain and sleet falling across central Illinois all the way back through the Appalachian Mountains. And while all of this is happening, we are also going to be dealing with a threat of severe weather back over in the deep south. And there is again a chance that we go live later today, so make sure you are subscribed to the channel. I do expect a few tornadoes later today, which is why we may end up going live. Eventually, by around 5 to 6 o'clock, the snow continues to move across the Great Lakes and also the Northeast. Severe weather continues to be a problem in the deep south, and we'll talk more about that later in the forecast. And eventually, as we go into the overnight hours, most of the snow is moving out of the Great Lakes region, and the only snow left over on Thursday will be mostly in far northern New England, with a little bit of freezing rain and sleet in central New England. So take it slow on the roadways once again if you are in those areas. And then as we go later into Thursday afternoon, all of that snow and freezing rain will be moving out with only a little bit of lake effect snow left over. But notice back over on the West Coast, we have a ton of snow and rain that's going to be falling on Thursday. Back over in parts of California, many areas could actually pick up as much as 4 to 6 inches of rainfall. We're going to talk more about this here in just a moment, but this right here will be our next big winter storm, which actually could pose a risk even for a severe weather outbreak on Saturday. In many areas, even as far north as Kentucky and Tennessee, could end up seeing some severe weather out of this system. The snowfall forecast remains relatively unchanged from yesterday's forecast, but in general, we are expecting a large area here to pick up 4 to 8 inches of snow from northern Kansas back into northwestern Illinois. In addition to that, there is a pocket here back over in southeastern Wisconsin and just around and north of Chicago that could pick up as much as 6 to 10 inches of snowfall. It's going to be a contingent on us getting some pretty impressive lake effect snow bands behind this winter storm, and that's mostly going to be happening tonight into early tomorrow morning, so something to keep a close eye on. But for the most part, most of areas around the Chicago Chicago area, we'll pick up around 3 to 6 inches of snowfall, which is why most areas around Chicago are in winter weather advisories. Back over into parts of Michigan, we do expect around 3 to 6 inches of snow there as well. And then if you're back over in Nebraska, Iowa, or even central Missouri, I do think 2 to 5 inches of snowfall is a realistic forecast. And then back over in the Northeast, we're not really expecting a whole lot of snow out of this winter storm unless you're back over in northern Maine. In general, though, unless you're in northern Maine, we're only really expecting a coating to maybe 3 inches of snow. So I would not really get too excited unless you're, again, in northern Maine or upstate New York. I think our next big winter storm for the Northeast will really be on Saturday and Sunday. We'll talk more about that here in just a moment. In terms of ice accumulation, the majority of this will be happening across areas like northern Ohio, all the way back through Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, where upwards of a glazing to maybe a tenth of an inch of ice is going to be happening in these areas, which will cause some slick spots on the roadways, but power outages are not very likely with this type of ice accumulation. And I want to point out that many areas back over in Pennsylvania and as well as Virginia and West Virginia and also throughout the Appalachian Mountains have mostly already seen the freezing rain that they are going to see, but there could be upwards of a tenth of an inch of ice accumulation additionally on top of what we've already seen. So keep that in mind. That's mostly going to be happening during the morning hours and also through the early afternoon today. Most winter storms are not just snow and ice. There's usually some sort of rain or severe weather aspect to them, and this one is definitely no exception to that, as we are anticipating a threat for severe weather today back over in the deep south. Overall, the main concern here is going to be the threat for damaging winds, hail, and even a few tornadoes, and an isolated strong tornado will be possible throughout the afternoon today. Overall, this morning, we're really going to be looking at mostly a line of storms, but eventually into the early afternoon, a lot of moisture will be coming out of the Gulf, in addition to a plentiful amount of wind shear, and instability is likely going to be enough here for there to be a few severe storms, mainly across the Gulf Coast in southeast Louisiana, southern Mississippi, southern and even up to central Alabama, and into parts of western Georgia throughout the afternoon and the early evening hours. Some of these tornado parameter values get as high as 5 to 6, so this is definitely something we need to watch for very closely today, and if there's anything that does become concerning later today, we will be live, so make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Overall, I think the main concern here today will be riding from about 2 p.m. all the way until about 8 p.m., and then there could still be a threat up until midnight, but eventually the instability will start to decrease, and eventually the overnight threat will mostly be damaging winds and maybe even an isolated tornado threat all the way through parts of Georgia and even Florida. So in terms of the timing and as well as the mode for severe weather throughout the morning hours, there will be some convection out there. This will actually limit, I think, this afternoon's threat of severe weather further to the north, including areas like central Mississippi and even back up into central Alabama. Eventually, as we get after lunchtime, we'll have a line of storms forming back out to the west here in Louisiana. I anticipate this to mostly just be isolated damaging winds and hail. I think a QLCS tornado threat may evolve as we go later into today, which means that there could be some embedded tornadoes in this line of thunderstorms. But the biggest concern will actually be any storms that come out of the Gulf and move inland. Any semi-discrete or discrete supercells will have an elevated chance at producing a threat for tornadoes. So we are really watching this area here later today, and this will really start around and just after lunchtime and eventually meander into the afternoon, and we are expecting this threat to grow before eventually a lot of this activity by around 5 to 6 o'clock tonight becomes a lot more linear. So overall, the tornado threat will be a bit lower. It will still exist. I think it'll be a bit lower though, and this will mostly be a damaging wind risk as we go into the evening hours, and then eventually as we go into overnight tonight, this is almost all damaging winds across the board. It should stay relatively isolated overnight for the damaging wind risk. Wouldn't rule out an isolated tornado into the morning hours across parts of the Florida Panhandle, even back through central and southwestern Georgia, and then eventually as we go later into tomorrow morning, the majority of these storms are moving to the east, and eventually around lunchtime, the only thing that is left are just a few strong storms across northern Florida, and then eventually that'll start to drop south, and it'll weaken out, not really expecting much for Florida unless you are in the Panhandle. And then after today's winter storm, we are anticipating another winter storm this weekend. It'll really ramp up as we go into Saturday, with the snow and freezing rain mostly being confined to the Midwest, Central Plains, and the Northeast, and then severe weather being a possibility, I think, in a relatively large area. This is going to be definitely a bit more of a significant severe weather event, I think, with damaging winds being the main concern, but any prefrontal convection that forms out in front of that line will have a potential for even strong tornadoes. So we definitely have to watch this day very closely here across the Deep South, the Dixie Alley, the Tennessee Alley, and even back into parts of the Mid-Atlantic region on the daytime hours on Saturday and even into the evening. Eventually, as we go overnight Saturday into Sunday morning, heavy snow and freezing rain continues in the Midwest, Ohio Valley, and Northeast. While severe weather remains a concern, heavy rainfall could also lead to some flooding. And then eventually, as we go into Sunday afternoon, the severe weather threat will be much lower along the East Coast, and then also snow and freezing rain continue back over in the Northeast and the Ohio Valley. Now, as we go into early to middle of the next week, there are some signs that another winter storm will form around Tuesday. Now, since this is 6 days out, there are a lot of questions, including how large will this winter storm be, where will the snow fall, and where will we even see freezing rain, and could we see severe weather? We don't really quite know yet, but I do think that this is going to be something to really watch for in the Southern Plains, the Tennessee Valley, and even back over into the Southeast as we go into the middle of next week. In general, though, I think it's just too early to get into specific details here. We're going to talk more about the winter storm that's happening on Saturday and Sunday in our next video, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and then we'll also be talking more about this if it is still a continuing threat. And then beyond this, things are very uncertain as we get closer to next weekend, which is the last weekend of February. And all of these storm systems will lead to a ton of rainfall. If you're back along the West Coast in areas like California, Nevada, Oregon, a lot of rain is going to be coming over the next few days, especially in California, where up and down the West Coast, we are anticipating a widespread 1 to 3 inches of rainfall. Some localized areas around and just south of San Francisco and back through Los Angeles could pick up as much as 3 to 6 inches of rainfall. So be prepared for this. Mudslides definitely being a possibility. Be careful out there. It's definitely going to be very wet, and this will be mostly happening on Thursday and as well as into early Friday. Even back into the Rocky Mountains in Colorado as well, going to be seeing a little bit of rainfall out of this. Another big concern is back over in the Southeast, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast. A lot of rain is coming here just over the next few days. We are anticipating a large area to see around 3 to 5 inches of rainfall between now all the way through Sunday night. So if you're back over in the Dixie Alley, the Ohio Valley, or even back over in the Mid-Atlantic, be careful. There could be upwards of 3 to 5 inches of rain. This is going on top of the rain that we've already seen. Areas that have been hit by Hurricane Helene are also going to be impacted by this, unfortunately, back over in western North Carolina. So stay safe out there and make sure you are subscribed to the channel, as we may be going live later today. If we don't go live today, we will be live on Saturday covering the severe weather and winter storm.